interpret labels appear is tendency, believed one of the most common mistakes of modern humans.
He did not say this to glorify darkness, but to point out that transformation does not begin by seeking light, but by having the courage to remain in the unclear zone where no answers are yet available. Silence as a psychological threshold does not require you to do it well. It does not judge whether you are staying correctly. It asks only one very simple but difficult question. Can you refrain from escaping your own experience for long enough? Not escaping into thought, action, entertainment, or attempts to fix things. Simply staying. This is not surrender nor passivity. It is a state of alert non-intervention, a presence without manipulation. In Jungian language, this is the moment when consciousness has not dissolved, but has also not imposed structure on experience. It is a fragile state, easily disrupted if one hastily seeks the familiar sense of control. Many people report that such nights pass very slowly. There is no climax, no major revelation, just a sense that time stretches, and that one's own presence becomes clearer in each moment. But this slowness is not stagnation. It is a sign that the psyche is quietly shifting from a mode of operation to a mode of reception. The state has changed, even if no content has yet appeared. And because there is nothing to grasp or name, this phase is easily overlooked or dismissed. Modern people are accustomed to measuring change by visible results, so a state that produces no clear answers is often considered useless or insignificant. Yet for Jung, this phase is indispensable in any process of transformation, because without a threshold, there can be no crossing, and without a pause, nothing genuinely new can emerge from within. Silence in the night, in this sense, is not a destination to be achieved, but a door. And that door does not open through effort or willpower, but through staying, not staying to achieve something, but staying long enough for the old to stop occupying the entire inner space. Only then can deeper layers of the psyche begin to speak in their own way, without being rushed or pre-directed. But that is the story of later sections. Here, at this very threshold, the only thing that truly needs to happen is that you do not leave, not out of fear, not out of impatience, nor out of the desire to quickly return to the familiar. And sometimes, simply staying in that silence on an ordinary night is enough for life to begin shifting, even if no one, including yourself, can yet name what has changed. And perhaps that is why Jung always emphasized that true transformation is never loud. Just one such night, quiet enough, honest enough, free enough from escape, can silently reset the direction of an entire life. If you have ever gone through such a night, not dramatic, not eventful, just a moment of silence where you no longer wanted to run from yourself, share your story in the comments. It does not need to be complete, nor contain a lesson, only to be real. Because sometimes, simply realizing that someone else has also stayed in that same ambiguous space is enough for an experience to no longer feel isolated. Number 4. Night as a state of regression, the retreat of consciousness. Silence does not open immediate understanding. It opens a different psychological movement, where consciousness no longer pushes forward. Regression. From Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the psyche enters a very particular state, one that is often misunderstood or even feared. In everyday language, regression sounds negative, evoking images of decline, weakness, or loss of control. But for Jung, regression is not a return that causes one to lose oneself. It is a necessary retreat that allows the entire psychic structure to reorganize at a deeper level. Regression in the Jungian sense is not a return to childhood in terms of memories or emotions, nor a descent into chaos. It is the withdrawal of consciousness from its central position of control, allowing psychic energy to flow toward more primordial layers, less shaped by roles, goals, and adaptive pressures. During the day, consciousness cannot regress, not because regression is unnecessary, but because consciousness has another task: keeping life functioning, maintaining a stable ego, ensuring adaptation to the external world. Only when those demands subside does regression become possible. Night facilitates this retreat, not through force, but through the absence of pressure. When no one is waiting for your response, when no task requires immediate completion, when no social gaze demands that you be someone, consciousness naturally loses its reason to remain at the front line. It is not pushed away, it withdraws. And this withdrawal is what makes many people feel uneasy, because they are accustomed to living in a constant forward tension. Jung described this process as more biological than conscious choice. The psyche, like the body, needs cycles of expansion and contraction. If it is always stretched outward, always oriented toward adaptation and control, it will exhaust itself. Regression is the necessary contraction phase, where energy is no longer spent maintaining images and roles,
head held high,
but redirected inward to be redistributed. Jung expressed this logic plainly. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Regression, in this sense, is not a step backward in life, but a prerequisite for deeper rooting before growth can continue in a new direction. Many people experience this state without being able to name it. They simply feel slower, less sharp, or less motivated at night. But upon closer examination, this is not a loss of energy. It is a redirection of energy. Instead of being expended outward to maintain familiar structures, psychic energy begins flowing inward, toward deeper layers rarely touched by daytime consciousness. And because consciousness measures value through productivity and results, this inward shift is easily misinterpreted as weakness. A very ordinary example can clarify this process. Some people only realize how tired they are when they finally sit down after a long day. While still moving and working, the body continues to push itself to complete tasks. But once movement stops, heaviness emerges. This does not mean the fatigue just appeared. It means the body has finally been allowed to acknowledge it. Regression of consciousness works in the same way. It does not create new disorder. It allows deeper layers to appear after being obscured all day. This process can be imagined like the movement of the tide. By day, the water is high, covering the surface, with all movement directed outward. By night, the tide recedes, not to leave the shore barren, but to reveal the underlying structure that has always been there but rarely seen. regression carries no message. It simply reveals terrain, and that terrain becomes the foundation for new structures to emerge later. It is important to emphasize that regression is not something you need to do correctly. It requires no technique, no effort, and carries no moral weight. It occurs naturally when conditions are right. And night, with its reduced demands on consciousness, provides those conditions. When you stop trying to understand who you are, stop forcing yourself to feel a certain way, and stop trying to return to familiar states through analysis or action, consciousness naturally retreats a step. At this point, many people panic and quickly pull themselves back through familiar means, scrolling on a phone, turning on noise, thinking incessantly, or reassuring themselves with rational explanations. They are not wrong. They are simply unaccustomed to allowing consciousness to relinquish its central position. But Jung believed that if people never learn to permit this retreat, their psychic life becomes stuck in an old structure, regardless of how much external change occurs. Jung viewed this process simply. He trusted that the psyche, like the body, knows how to self-regulate when not excessively interfered with. People do not always need to push forward, overcome, or become better. Sometimes, the healthiest thing is to slow down. And for that reason, a night of regression does not make you weaker, even if it appears so externally. It does not cause you to lose direction, even if direction temporarily disappears. It does one quiet but vital thing. It stops forcing the psyche to move forward when the foundation beneath is not yet ready. That is why Jung emphasized that restructuring cannot occur without regression. At this stage, one night does not change your life through action or decisions. It changes your life by allowing consciousness to retreat, giving deeper layers of the psyche space to reorganize. And even if you see no results yet, restructuring has already begun from within. But as with all previous sections, regression is not an end point. It is a phase. One night may be enough to initiate this process, but not to complete it. Here, the only thing truly required is that you do not interfere with the retreat through fear or control, because only when consciousness accepts its temporary withdrawal from the center can the psyche reorganize according to a deeper, more stable, and more truthful order. Here, on this night of retreat, the only thing that needs to be understood is this. Sometimes, to truly change direction, a person does not need to move forward, but needs the courage to step back. And sometimes, just one night that allows this retreat to happen is enough for life to begin moving according to an entirely different logic, even if no one, including yourself, can yet name what that change is. Number 5. Persona falls away when there is no audience. After the gentle regression of consciousness at night, when energy is no longer pushed outward to maintain control, something else begins to happen very naturally, though it is rarely named clearly. The familiar roles a person inhabits gradually lose their footing, not because someone strips them away, and not because the person deliberately chooses to live more authentically, but simply because the conditions that allow those roles to exist are temporarily no longer present. This change does not arrive through conflict or confrontation, but through the quiet absence of the very elements that once sustained the mask: gaze, expectation, feedback, and the need for recognition. When these elements withdraw, the persona no longer has a foundation from which to continue operating as it does during the day. In Jungian psychology, the part responsible for appearing before the world, is called the persona. The persona is not falsehood in a moral sense, but a necessary mask that allows human beings to live in society. Through the persona, you know how to speak in a meeting, how to behave with your family, what image to present in order to be accepted. The persona exists through being seen, through feedback, through the expectations of others. It requires an audience in order to function. During the day, when the world is still watching you, when roles are still being called by name, the persona operates smoothly. It helps you maintain image, position, and consistency in the eyes of others. But at night, especially on nights when consciousness has retreated and no longer stands on the front line, the audience disappears. No one is waiting for your response. No gaze is demanding that you be a certain version of yourself. And when there is no audience, the persona has nothing to do. Not because you decide to drop the role, but because there is no stage on which the role can be called forth. This falling away is not dramatic. It does not resemble a collapse of identity. It is usually felt very lightly, very ordinarily. A sense of not needing to keep up an image anymore. Many people describe that moment as both relieving and empty. Relieving because for the first time that day, they do not have to perform. Empty because when the role temporarily leaves, they do not immediately know who they are without it. That emptiness often confuses people, but in Jungian logic, it is not a sign of loss. It is a sign that a space has just opened. Jung once wrote very bluntly about this. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The persona is not the essence of a person, but an image maintained by a tacit agreement between the individual and the collective. When that agreement is temporarily suspended at night, the mask does not need to be torn off. It is simply set down. And it is precisely this setting down, unforced, undramatic, that is the crucial point of the psychological movement Jung described. This can be seen very clearly in the story of a public figure like David Bowie, a global icon of music and fashion, known for his ability to continually reinvent his image and artistic identity on stage. Throughout different phases of his life, Bowie appeared before the public in strikingly different personas: Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, and then completely contrasting images in later periods. Yet Bowie himself shared that the most important moments of his life did not occur on stage, but during periods of being alone, when he no longer had to maintain any image at all. It was in those nights without an audience that he felt the exhaustion of constantly being someone. And from there, he allowed himself to change his image more truthfully, rather than merely refreshing it to impress. What matters is not that Bowie found his true self, but that he dared to let periods without any role exist long enough for a new image to form on its own. This aligns closely with Jung's understanding of the persona. The mask does not fall because a person becomes braver, but because the context no longer requires it to exist. When there is no gaze, no role to defend, the persona loses its function. And when it loses its function, it naturally retreats, like a tool being set down when it is no longer needed. Here, there is no act of throwing it away, only a cessation of use. This moment often leaves people feeling confused. They may feel that they don't quite know how they are, or that they don't know what they're supposed to feel. But in Jungian logic, this is not an identity crisis. It is a sign that the psyche has entered a very rare zone, a zone where there is no need to perform, no need to play a role, no need to prove anything. A zone where value is no longer measured by the reactions of others, but by the bare presence of oneself. What must be emphasized is this: the falling away of the persona at night does not mean that a person has reached inner truth. It only indicates that one intermediary layer is no longer covering everything. Jung was very careful here. He did not claim that when the persona falls away, a person instantly becomes authentic or awakened. He only said that at that moment, a person is no longer compelled to be an image. And it is precisely this not being compelled to be someone that is so rare in modern life. That is why the accompanying feeling is often a strange sense of relief. Relief from the burden of maintaining an image. But there is also a gap, because during most of the day, we are used to defining ourselves through roles. When those roles temporarily withdraw, the gap appears not to create confusion, but to create space. A space that had previously been filled by schedules, responsibilities, and expectations. Jung did not advise people to try to live without a persona. He understood very clearly that the mask is necessary for social life, but he also emphasized that if a person completely identifies with the persona, they will become depleted. Nights like these, when there is no audience, are rare opportunities for a person to remember that they are not only their daytime roles, not to deny the roles, but not to be swallowed by them. A night when the persona falls away does not produce immediate results. The next morning, you will still return to your roles. You still need the persona to live. But a very subtle difference has occurred. You no longer fully believe that you are that mask. A small distance has been created between the person and the role. And that distance, however fragile, is one of the things that can quietly transform an entire life later on. Because once you know that you can exist, even for just one night without performing, the persona no longer controls you absolutely. And sometimes just one such night without an audience is enough for life to begin turning in another direction, very gently, very slowly, but irreversibly. Number 6. A practical story. 1. A sleepless night and the collapse of the persona. After the persona
Then the clock hits 3:00 a.m. and the persona, that curated functional version of yourself present to the world, finally collapses under the weight of exhaustion. You aren't actually left with nothing. You are left with the fertile soil of your own existence. The vacuum you feel isn't an empty void. It is the clearing of old brush to make way for green bed. We often mistake the collapse of our social identity for a personal ending. Nature, nothing grows year, year round. The persona was a seasonal god. It poured out because it was static while you were open. The vacuum you feel is actually fallow ground, just as a field must lie empty to regain its nutrients. Your psyche is clearing away the performance of being okay to make room for the reality of being alive. The vacuum feels like it is sucking the life out of you because you are looking at it as a whole. In physics, a vacuum is a state of lowest energy that is still teeming with fluctuations. You aren't facing a nothing. You are facing a clear. Green wealth begins with the realization that when you stop doing, you finally start. The vacuum is the space required for your internal ecosystem to breathe without the smog of external expectations. Green wealth is the currency of resilience, intuition, and self compassion. Unlike the gold of the persona, which relies on outside validation, green wealth grows from the inside out. Every breath you take in this sleepless silence is a deposit into your true reserves. The roots, your history and survival, the leaves, your current sensations, the cool air, the weight of the blanket, the sap, the underlying consciousness that remains even when the character you play has faded. You transition from the vacuum to the green. Observe the empty space with a gardener eye rather than a critic lens. The old persona is the vacuum, the new persona is the green belt. The old persona is the built on shoots, new persona is built on I. And the old persona is rigid and brittle. The new persona is flexible and organic. The old persona requires constant external light. The new persona is photosynthesizes even from the shadows. Old persona existing to maintain, new persona replenishing to inherit. Close your eyes and stop trying to rebuild the person who collapsed. The person was tired, let them sleep. Instead, in a small, stubborn vine of light, starting at the base of your spine. With every heartbeat, it claims a bit more that vacuum. It does not need you to be successful, charm, or productive. It only needs you to be present. The vacuum is not a hungry ghost. It is the cool, dark earth. And you, in all your sleepless vulnerability, are the sea. Green milk is the inevitable treasure of staying. Clock hits 3 a.m. and the persona, that curated, functional version of yourself you present to the world, finally collapses under the weight of exhaustion. You aren't actually left with nothing. You are left with the fertile soil of your existence. The vacuum you feel isn't empty void. It is the clearing of old brush to make it fertile. The house was silent, but the air inside Elias' room felt heavy, like it was held together by static. At 3:14 a.m., the Elias, who managed a team, paid a mortgage, and laughed at the right time, conversation finally broke. It didn't happen with a scream. It happened with a glass sculpture losing its glue, a silent, glittering collapse into the carpet. He sat on the floor, leaning against the bed frame. For years, he had lived inside the person, a polished, high-rise apartment of him. Now, looking inward, he saw only a vacuum. The rooms of his identity were empty. No furniture, no art, no purpose. Just a cold, whistling wind where it was hardly used to. And he whispered to the shadows. But as he sat in that vacuum, he noticed something strange. The vacuum didn't hurt. It was just precious. He looked down at his hands without the alias. Was a success or a failure? His hands were just skin and bone, marvelous machines moving in the moonlight. He felt the rise and fall of his chest. He wasn't doing the breathing. The breathing was doing him. In the corner of his mind's eye, where the vacuum felt depressed, he imagined a single microscopic speck of moss. It was a vibrant neon green, flashing with the grey void of his pictures. He didn't try to build a new room or a new ego. He just watched the moss. He gave it the only thing he had left his attention. And the silence of it didn't need a blueprint. It needed a person to tell it how to grow. It crept over the edges of the weapon, turning the cold emptiness into a soft, damp carpet of living velvet. He realized that the vacuum wasn't cool he was falling into. It was the clearance required for his new growth. The persona was a concrete parking lot, stable, of death. The collapse had cracked the concrete, and the green wind was finally pushing through the fissures. By 4:30 a.m., Elias didn't feel like a manager or a provider or even a man. He felt like a forest. He felt the deep, silent wealth of simply existing. His value wasn't in the structure of the house or the title on his business card. His wealth was the sap, like resilience, flowing through his veins, quiet power of a plant that grows in the dark, and the strange, cool peace of having nothing left to lose. When the sun finally began to gray the edges of the cottons, he didn't try to glue the glass or gel back together. He stood up, stiff jointed but rooted. The vacuum was gone, replaced by lush, interior wildness. The world would ask for the persona that by 9:00 a.m. he would give them a version of it, but he would keep the forest for himself. He was no longer a hollow vessel. He was the gardener of his own soul. When the polished persona finally collapses in the dead of night, you don't fall into a void, you fall into the fertile earth. Where a garden that has been paved over years to build a stage for your persona, what is the very first thing you would plant in the soil now that the concrete has finally cracked? When nobody is left for this, who is to perform when there is no one left? What if you didn't actually fail, but simply outgrew the character you have been playing?
the harmony you maintained. You become the thermostat, not the thermometer. You set the emotional tone of your life. You begin to realize that everything you've ever wanted was simply an invitation to feel something new. The desire wasn't about the thing, it was about the state. You weren't chasing the car, the house, the person. You were chasing a feeling. And now you've turned within and found that the feeling was never out there. It was always available within you, waiting to be chosen. And as you feel it, you notice something strange. The desire begins to dissolve, not because it was denied, but because it has been fulfilled. This is the great paradox of creation. The moment you no longer need the thing, it comes. The moment you let go of effort and enter into rest, the path unfolds. The moment you stop trying to create and start accepting that it is already created, everything begins to accelerate. You become a vessel for the unseen to express itself. You become a mirror for the divine imagination. You live as one who knows, not guesses, not hopes, but knows. And that knowing comes from feeling. You recognize now that all knowing is preceded by feeling. Long before it becomes fact, it is felt. Long before it is seen, it is believed. The feeling is the signal, the vibration, the agreement between you and the reality you have chosen. It is not manufactured through willpower. It flows through surrender. You let the feeling come to life within you, and you dwell in it as though there were nothing else to dwell in. And as you persist in that dwelling place, everything that belongs to that state finds you. You stop reaching and you start receiving. You stop asking and you begin affirming. You no longer say, I want this, but thank you that I already have it. You no longer strive for a breakthrough. You rest in the realization that there is nothing to break through, only something to become aware of. You are not waiting on the universe. The universe is waiting on you to align, to assume, to feel. And when you do, the heavens open, the way is made, the bridges of incidents unfold, and what was once impossible becomes inevitable. In this place, your imagination is not a toy. It is a tool, a portal, a sanctuary. You go there not to escape reality, but to create it. You do not merely see with your inner eye. You feel with your inner being. You step into the scene of your desire, as if it were already complete, and you feel what you would feel if it were true. And then you let that feeling remain. You wear it like a garment. You breathe it like air. And the longer you remain in that feeling, the more natural it becomes, until it no longer feels like imagination. It feels like home. When it feels like home, life begins to shape itself around it. People begin to respond to you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. You are no longer the person who is waiting. You are the one who has received, and life treats you accordingly. For the world cannot help but yield to the one who feels it real. Your environment becomes the echo of your internal world. What once felt distant becomes close. What once felt hard becomes easy. What once felt like a dream becomes your daily experience. You no longer wonder if it's working. You know it's working, because you feel the shift inside you. You no longer check the outer world for signs. Your sign is the inner peace, the inner joy, the inner stability that has taken root. You have moved into the fulfillment, so completely that nothing can shake you. Even if the outer contradicts your assumption, you do not flinch. You smile, because you understand that the shadow always flickers before the light shines fully. It's not a denial. It's a delay that cannot last. You feel the satisfaction before the senses catch up. You live in the harvest before the seeds have visibly sprouted. That's the power of feeling. It shortens the distance between desire and fulfillment, between asking and having, between imagining and becoming. It collapses time, not by force but by frequency. For time bends to the one who already feels it done. The world responds to the dominant vibration, not the desperate plea. And your vibration is shaped by the state you occupy. And your state is maintained through what you feel to be true. This is not about empty affirmations or surface-level positivity. This is about embodiment. This is about being so saturated in the energy of your desire fulfilled, that you become indistinguishable from it. People look at you and feel something, even if they can't put words to it. There's a presence, a completeness, a certainty that radiates from you. You're not grasping for proof. You are the proof. You don't speak as one trying to convince, you speak as one who knows. And that knowing is what moves mountains. You no longer need to fight for your future. You rest in it. You feel it ahead of its arrival. You live from it instead of toward it. And everything begins to conspire on your behalf, not because you manipulated circumstances, but because you became the magnet that draws all things unto itself. Your faith becomes sight. Your inner reality becomes your outer experience, not by chance, but by law, not by accident, but by assumption, not by struggle, but by surrender. You become the embodiment of your desire, and the world mirrors you perfectly. You don't question the mirror anymore. You don't plead with it to change. You simply change your expression, and the mirror reflects it. So too with life. The moment you shift internally, life begins its dance of reflection. And even if it takes time in the outer realm, you remain unfazed, because within you, it is already done. You are not waiting for the world to catch up. You are walking in the assurance that it must. The scene may not have fully materialized, but the feeling has, and that is the true manifestation. You understand now why the ancients said, "Let the weak say, I am strong." It wasn't a denial of reality, it was a declaration of a deeper reality. It was a command to assume the state and feel it before the evidence arrived, because the evidence always follows the assumption, and the assumption is made alive by feeling. Not words, not effort, not logic. Feeling. It is the language of the subconscious, the instruction given to the deeper self, the vibrational code that aligns you with your chosen world. And so you return again and again to the place within. You close your eyes to the noise, and you awaken to the silence where all things are possible. You turn from appearances, and you immerse yourself in the end. You walk in the harvest. You eat from the table before the table appears. You rejoice before the answer, because in your world, the only world that truly matters, it is already done. You are already there. You have already received, and the feeling makes it so. Each time you feel it, you lay another stone in the foundation of your new reality. Each time you return to the state of the wish fulfilled, you deepen the groove in consciousness, and soon what once felt like imagination begins to feel like memory. It becomes familiar. Second nature, your new normal. You are no longer pretending. You are remembering. You are not hoping. You are experiencing. And because you feel it so vividly, it must externalize. The law cannot be broken. What you feel, you become. What you persist in feeling, you must express. So you persist, not with strain, but with quiet confidence. You let go of the compulsion to check for results, because the feeling is the result. The inner world is where the real creation happens. The outer world is merely the echo. Just as a shadow follows form, the physical must follow the spiritual impression. And feeling is the spiritual impression. It carves the image into your subconscious, and the subconscious, like fertile soil, brings forth after its kind. You do not need to beg the soil to produce what you've planted. You simply water it with faith, sunlight it with feeling, and trust the process. So it is with your consciousness. Once you feel it real, once you saturate yourself with the end, as though it were now, the seed is sown. It cannot remain buried forever. It will rise. It will bloom. It will manifest in ways you could never calculate. For consciousness is not limited by logic. It is governed by law, and the law responds to assumption that is felt. As you continue in this practice, you become less reactive to circumstances. You no longer let the senses dictate your mood or belief. You know now that appearances are but past assumptions taking form. They are not permanent. They are not ultimate. They are the reflection of old states. And you've moved on. You've selected a new dwelling. You are abiding in the end. You are no longer the version of yourself who lacked or needed. You are the one who already possesses. And because you feel that to be true, the law honors it. When you feel something real enough, it imprints itself so deeply that all contrary facts dissolve. They lose their grip on your attention. You are not shaken by delay or contradiction. You stay faithful to the feeling, for the feeling is the bridge. It is the movement from invisibility to visibility. It is the arc of manifestation. You may not know how it will unfold, but you know that it must. That is the rest of faith. That is the rest of the one who walks in assumption. You no longer strive. You allow. You no longer chase. You choose. You choose again and again to feel as if it were done. Not once, not casually, but with consistency and reverence. You treat the feeling as sacred, because it is the key to your world. You know that the more naturally you feel it, the more swiftly it comes. You cultivate it in quiet moments. You revisit it throughout your day. You return to it before sleep, and you wake up with it in your heart. It is your silent prayer, your living meditation, your invisible mold, through which the formless becomes form. As you persist in this internal knowing, life becomes less about achieving, and more about aligning. The striving ceases, because you are no longer trying to become, you are being. You are no longer convincing yourself, it has become effortless. The burden lifts because you're not pushing the world to move. You are moving internally, and the world is simply following. The outer bends to the inner. That is the secret the world has forgotten. But you remember, you know, you felt it. The more deeply you feel it, the more deeply you embody it. You walk differently, speak differently, carry yourself with the posture of someone who has, not with arrogance, but with divine assurance. You are no longer swayed by rejection, because you know your assumption is true. You no longer crumble at delay, because you know the harvest is certain. You are unmoved because you are grounded, not in facts but in feeling. You know your world will rearrange itself to reflect what you have chosen within. And now what once felt like fantasy becomes felt reality. Not because anything changed on the outside first, but because you changed. The feeling of wealth, the feeling of love, the feeling of success, the feeling of joy. It begins within, and it spills outward. You are no longer the one asking how. It no longer matters. The how is not yours to manage. Your part is the feeling. The feeling does the work. The feeling paves the way. The feeling instructs life what to deliver. And when you feel it long enough, fully enough, faithfully enough, it comes. It comes not because you chased it, but because you matched it. You didn't force it. You aligned with it. You didn't wait for it. You lived from it. That is the difference between one who manifests and one who hopes. One assumes the posture of fulfillment. The other lingers in the shadows of wanting. But wanting is not having. Wanting only prolongs the gap. Having shortens it. And the only way to have before you have is to feel it. So you become skilled in the art of inner movement. You begin to understand the subtlety of this work. You refine your focus. You watch your reactions. You become aware of the invisible conversations in your mind. You notice how quickly the feeling of lack tries to creep in, and how gently yet firmly you must redirect yourself back to the feeling of possession. You start to discipline your attention, not with force but with love, because you know that where your feeling goes, your life follows. This feeling becomes your atmosphere. It becomes the state in which you dwell, not occasionally, but continuously. You create a home for your desired state, and live in it so fully that it becomes more real to you than the facts of the senses. You prioritize it. You protect it. You honor it, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. That's when your power is proven, when you hold the feeling despite outer contradictions. That's when the world must yield. That's when the bridge of incidents begins to unfold. The phone call comes, the door opens, the shift happens, not by magic, but by law, not by coincidence, but by correspondence. You felt it long enough that life could no longer ignore it. You didn't beg or manipulate. You became, and in becoming you changed your world. Not one part of your world can remain the same when you persist in a new feeling. Reality must bow to what you feel consistently. It must become the reflection of the internal movie you've chosen to play. And so I leave you with this truth. You are not at the mercy of your conditions. You are the cause of them. You are not waiting on life. Life is waiting on you. The secret has always been within your grasp. Feel it. Feel it as though it were real. Feel it until it becomes real. Do not wait for the evidence. Become the evidence. Assume the state of the one who already possesses what they once desired. Walk in it, dwell in it, sleep in it, and you will prove the law to yourself, not through effort, but through alignment. You do not need to beg God or life for a change. You need only to feel the change, because when you feel it, you are it. And when you are it, the world has no choice but to reflect it. As Neville Goddard said, change your conception of yourself and you will automatically change the world in which you live. So change it now, not by force but by feeling. Feel it so deeply that nothing can shake your knowing. And in time the world will rearrange to match the vision you've held, the state you've embodied, and the reality you've dared to feel real. That is the law. That is the power. That is you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are by shifting the way you speak. You'll say, I am able, and watch as ability meets you. You'll say, I am chosen, and circumstances will bend to highlight your favor. You'll say, I am whole, and healing will begin, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped speaking against it. This is the divine code. It's hidden in plain sight. The sacred texts of every tradition speak it in symbols. The mystics live by it in silence. The prophets proclaimed it with fire in their bones. And yet here you are, hearing it anew, not with your ears, but with your soul. Because something within you already knows this. You felt it in the quiet moments, in the déjà vu, in the flashes of clarity that vanish before you can explain them. You've always known your words held weight. You just forgot that they were bricks in the house you're living in. So stop waiting for the world to tell you what's possible. Start telling the world what is. I am is your permission slip. I am is your access point. It is the beginning of every miracle and the root of every breakthrough. Let the world say what it wants. Let logic argue. Let doubt rise. You hold to the word. Speak it in secret. Guard it with reverence. Repeat it until your bones believe. And when your body still feels tired, say, I am renewed. When your bank account looks dry, say, I am overflowing. When no one claps for you, say, I am celebrated. Because eventually the outer must mirror the inner. It has no choice. Creation isn't optional. It's law. And your words, they are the lawmaker. Speak them wisely. Speak them deliberately. Speak them in love. Because you are not here to describe life. You are here to declare it. And yet as you begin to declare, as you dare to claim the I am, you will notice something strange, an urge to share it, to explain it, to speak it into the ears of others, so that they might see your transformation and believe in it with you. But I must tell you with all the urgency of truth, do not. What is sacred must remain hidden, not because it is fragile, but because it is formless, and form takes shape best in silence. When you plant a seed into the earth, you do not pull it up each day to check if it's growing. You trust the mystery of dark soil. You let the unseen do its perfect work. Likewise, when you speak your creative word, when you say I am and attach it to the reality you choose to live in, you must seal it inside yourself like a sacred vow. Speak it inwardly, consistently with unwavering faith, but share it with no one, not because others are evil or unworthy, but because they live in the logic of the seen, and you are speaking from the authority of the unseen. When you tell someone your declaration, especially one that has not yet taken visible form, they begin to reflect it through the lens of their own doubts, limitations, and fears. They look at your current results, not your inner shift, and without meaning to, they try to correct you back into their version of reality. Their words won't sound cruel. They may even sound caring. But make no mistake, every seed of doubt they plant becomes a delay in your manifestation. You do not need external approval for an inner truth. That is the trap. That is the noise. That is the delay. Because the moment you utter your desire into the ears of one who does not live by faith, you invite analysis. And analysis is the enemy of assumption. It begins to pull your declared word out of the womb of the subconscious, placing it back in the courtroom of reason. And what lives in reason must obey logic. But what lives in the unseen, what lives in spirit, is not subject to logic. It is subject to belief. Protect the early form of your vision as a mother protects a child in her womb. It doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be nourished in thought, in feeling, in stillness. It needs to be kept away from the friction of disbelief, the erosion of criticism, and the chill of intellectual doubt. You may say, but I want support. I want someone to believe with me. And I tell you now, your own belief is more than enough. It is not a group vote. Creation is not democracy, it is decree. In the early stages of manifestation, silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. When you are gestating a new reality, speak less. Not just to others, but even to yourself. Let your declaration be brief but bold, I am. Let the feeling carry more weight than the words. Let the assumption become so normal, so familiar, that you no longer feel the need to announce it. Because true power never explains itself. It simply is. When you walk in the knowing of a fulfilled desire, your need to prove it vanishes. You do not need to convince anyone of what you already are. The rose does not ask permission to bloom. It simply opens in season. Likewise, your word, kept sacred, will blossom in its appointed hour without your needing to justify it. And here's what's miraculous. When you stop announcing your dreams, they begin arriving faster. Not because the dream changed, but because your energy stopped leaking into the world of opinion. You are no longer dividing your creative power between imagining and explaining. You are letting it gather, condense, focus. And when that happens, when your word becomes your atmosphere, reality bends, quietly, certainly, powerfully. So don't feel pressured to reveal your inner work to outer eyes. Don't advertise what's being woven in secret. Let your transformation speak through results, not announcements. Let the shift happen so deeply that when the world finally sees it, they say, "When did this happen?" And all you will do is smile, because you will know it happened the moment you said, "In silence I am," and told no one. You see, if you've made a silent declaration about who you are, one so sacred and potent that it must remain unspoken to the world, it brings us to a brutal but essential truth. Who you believe you are will determine everything. That's not just poetic, and it's certainly not some esoteric abstraction. It's practical, it's psychological, it's foundational. Let me put it plainly. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. If you say "I am," and you follow that phrase with something weak, something bitter, something that reflects your current struggle instead of your intended strength, then you're not speaking the future into existence. You're reinforcing the present prison. And you're doing it with conviction, with energy, with identity. Human beings are wired in a very particular way. You act in accordance with what you identify as. That's why these two words, "I am," are so deeply embedded in your psyche. They're not casual. They're declarations of being. And when you repeat them, they begin to shape the lens through which you perceive the world, and more importantly, through which the world responds to you. This is why people sabotage their own growth, because they're trying to achieve something without becoming the type of person who naturally achieves it. It's not enough to hope for wealth while still identifying as someone who's always scraping by. It's not enough to desire love while clinging to the belief that you're unlovable. That contradiction creates a split inside of you, a psychological war, and it paralyzes you. Do you know how many people live stuck in that contradiction? Thousands, millions, maybe more. They say they want to change, but every word they speak confirms the identity of the person they were yesterday. And the body listens, the brain listens, the world listens. You can't lie to yourself and expect real change. The unconscious mind, the core of who you are, doesn't respond to lies. It responds to belief that has been rehearsed into reality. So if you want to manifest anything at all, you must first become the version of yourself who already has it. You must speak from that place, think from that place, behave as though it were already true, not in a delusional way, but in a strategic, courageous, focused way. This is where the hard work comes in, not the outer hustle, but the inner shift, the daily recalibration of your identity. You need to ask yourself, who am I being today? Do my thoughts match the future I claim I want? Are my habits aligned with the kind of person I say I am? It's tough, and it's sobering, because most people want the result without the reconstruction. They want the fruit without growing the root. But reality doesn't work like that. Your identity is like a thermostat. You might spike in behavior, try something new, set a goal, declare a dream, but if your internal identity hasn't changed, you'll snap back to where that thermostat is set. It's inevitable. That's why people who win the lottery usually lose it all. That's why people who suddenly fall in love often sabotage it, because the identity didn't match the blessing, and so the blessing gets rejected, whether consciously or not. So what do? You change the setting. You raise the standard. You stop saying, "I'll become that someday," and start saying, "That's who I am now." And the moment you say it, not performatively, but sincerely, deeply, It starts to become true. You act differently. You speak differently. You see differently. Let me be brutally clear about something. This shift in identity is not comfortable. It will feel like lying at first. It will feel unnatural. But that's because you've spent so many years rehearsing a limited version of yourself. Of course, truth feels foreign if you've been loyal to falsehood for a lifetime. But that's no excuse to stay small. You're not meant to simply survive your story. You're meant to rewrite it. And that starts with the two words that define your character arc before the world ever sees the ending, I am. Not I wish, not I might, not I hope, but I am. This is where personal responsibility begins, and personal power is born. What you're about to discover could rewrite your entire reality. And the strange thing is, once you start to speak those words, I am, from a place of deep conviction, once you begin to embody a new identity, instead of begging for a new outcome, something else happens, something subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly profound. The world begins to shape itself around your assumption, and your imagination becomes the soil from which your future grows. That's not metaphor, that's reality. You might think imagination is reserved for children or artists or storytellers, but that's dangerously naive. Every single person is imagining something all the time, and more often than not, it's unconscious. They're imagining rejection before it happens, failure before they even begin, conflict before the words are spoken, and because of that, their life becomes an exact mirror of the worst-case scenarios they've rehearsed 1,000 times in their own minds. The imagination is not optional. It's not a toy. It's the womb of your experience. If you imagine consistently from the place of the person you used to be, you will remain that person, regardless of what affirmations you recite, what goals you set, or what external efforts you take. And so, this becomes the critical task. You must take control of what you imagine. This is where discipline meets vision. Imagination, when used intentionally, becomes your greatest tool, not for escape, but for embodiment, for becoming. So let's look at this carefully. If you want to shift your identity, if you want your words, those powerful declarations of I am, to stick, to take root in the subconscious and bear fruit in your life, you need to do more than say them. You need to see them. You need to feel them. And not as distant possibilities, but as present realities. Your imagination must begin to operate from the place you want to be, not toward it. That's the difference. Most people imagine forward. They look at their current circumstances, they look at the mountain ahead, and then they say, someday I'll get there. But that mindset traps them in the very reality they're trying to escape. Because as long as something is imagined in the future, it is not believed in the present. And what isn't believed now has no power to manifest. So what's the alternative? You imagine backwards. You place yourself mentally in the future, in the state already fulfilled, and then you look back from there with the confidence of someone who's already arrived. You say, of course this happened. I've lived it 1,000 times in my mind. And then something inside of you shifts. The fear begins to evaporate. The doubts lose their voice, because you've made the future familiar, and what's familiar is no longer frightening. Now, this isn't fantasy, this isn't delusion, this is responsible creation. You have to remember that the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined. If you feed it an image long enough, especially one that's emotionally charged and repeated, it begins to organize your behavior consciously and unconsciously to make that image come true. And here's the key, this only works when you're consistent. When you're disciplined enough to stop returning to the version of yourself who doubts, who hesitates, who flinches. You must learn to live in the scene you've imagined day after day, regardless of what your senses tell you. That's the price of transformation, because there will be resistance. You'll be tempted to check the mirror, to look at the numbers, to ask for reassurance. But the mirror can only reflect the previous state of consciousness, not the one you've just stepped into. The world is slow to catch up, but it always does. The question is, will you hold the vision long enough for it to catch you? If you fold too early, if you abandon the imagined reality because the outer world hasn't yet conformed, then you've trained your mind to believe that only the visible is real. And in doing so,